Well, hello, home group pastors, and welcome to this home group tutorial on session 8 of His Story Greater Than. We are in this section, we're in the Gospel of Matthew, chapters 21 and 22. First of all, I want to thank you. Before I get into that, I'd like to thank you for such a great turnout at our meeting a couple of weeks ago where we talked about the future, shared some of the longer term vision of the church, and how we're planning to kind of up our game when it comes to equipping you as home group pastors. So I want to make myself personally available. My cell phone number is 501-609-6103, and I think that number may be on the video right there. So 501-609-6103. If you have any questions or any needs you have in your home group, please don't fail to give me a call, because we want to resource you. You are incredibly important to what we're trying to do. All right, well, let's get into this session 8. The first set of questions is from the January 28th sermon that I preached called Normal Christianity Part 2. And really the crux of the sermon, which by the way I had tons of distractions that day. I felt like I was a little disrupted, which happens to be the main idea of the sermon. I wonder if that was for a reason. Anyway, the main point of the sermon is that Jesus and His gospel, the person of Jesus and the message that this person delivers to those original hearers and to us now, they are disruptive. And disruptive is both a good term and a bad term. If your life is not going the way you want it to, it being disrupted is a good thing. But if you think life is going great for you, a disruption is a negative thing. And so that's kind of the point of the sermon, in that Jesus and His gospel disrupt. I talked about 3 areas of society. It disrupts economic systems. In other words, it shakes the way money is seen and valued, what's important, what's not, what do you do with money. It is disruptive to religious systems. Religion Christianity is not a religion. Christianity is a way of life. Religions are man's attempt to try to connect with God on our terms. And so the gospel of Jesus is this relational thing, and it disrupts that. It's very different than an organized religion. And so the gospel disrupts it. And the last thing is power systems. And we see that in both Matthew 21 and then I went to Acts 19, where Jesus and then later His disciples, when they bring the full thrust of the gospel to a society, it shakes some things up and it disrupts it. So I'll just start on these questions. It says, as a group, read Matthew 21:12-17. Why was Jesus so angry at the temple, and what gave Him authority to turn over the tables? Well, what was making Him mad was that the economic, religious, and power centers, those 3 strata I talked about, were taking advantage of those who were coming to worship. He was very angry because, as He said, His house should be a house of prayer, but they've made it a den of thieves. They were taking what God meant to be redemptive, to be holy, to be a way for them to get to God, and they were abusing that. They were profiting on it. They were maintaining control by what they set in motion. So those are some of those reasons. And let the group talk about that a little bit. And then the last part of that was what gave Him authority to overturn the tables. Well, He was God. This was His house. This is where Israel and all the Jews came to be with God. Jesus was God. He was fully God, fully man. He was demonstrating His power as Yahweh. Second question is, the word disruptive was used in this sermon. How are Jesus and His gospel disruptive to certain individuals and groups? So let them wrestle with that. We've talked about it already, but the gospel changes the way you see everything. So it's disruptive. It changes the way, in that culture, it was a very male-dominated culture, and the gospel of Jesus all of a sudden was readily accepted by women who found a place in this new Christian community called the church. That's why if you see the gospel moving forward, it's often the women who are the most receptive to the gospel on the front end. But imagine how that disrupted certain families where the male was so dominant. That's just one example. The gospel exposes what is wrong, that flashlight idea. It exposes what's wrong and forces a believer, if they want to truly be a believer, to change some things. That's disruptive. Question 3, why do some people or groups find Jesus' disruption good and others find it bad? In this Bible story, who are these groups? If you remember, I love charts, and I gave a chart about those 3 layers of society that are disruptive. And then I have 2 columns. One is those that are kingdom ready and those that are kingdom resistant. And it's the poor on the economic system who are kingdom ready. The disruption in that framework is actually good for them. The rich, they already have it all figured out, and they don't want any disruption. They got life set the way they want it set. So it's those in need versus those who think they don't have need that frames that disruption differently. Talk about the 2 groups. In that story specifically, you've got the religious, the Pharisees, who the disruption was going to change the way they functioned and was going to strip them of some of their power. In that story, though, the lame and the blind, they were still coming to Jesus wanting healing. They wanted their blindness disrupted. They wanted to see. And so the framing of this disruption is very different. So those are kind of where we want you to go with that question. Last question on that sermon is, should the gospel disrupt our lives? And in what ways should it be disruptive? And how is that good news? This is not a rhetorical question because we often think the gospel is supposed to make our lives easy. It's supposed to make us happy. It's to help us get what we want. Well, the gospel disrupts all that. The gospel is actually the opposite of that. It's forcing us to want what He wants. It's to disrupt the natural inclinations that we have. So we help them understand. That's where we're going with that. And how is that good news? Well, it's clear in John 39 that it's as we lose, not John 39, Matthew 10:39. It's as we lose our life, we find it. And if we find our life, we're actually losing it. So if we're an insider and we got it all together, we're actually dying. There's a way that seems right unto a man, but the end is death. So remind them that this disruption is actually good news because it's redemptive. And that's a word we're going to use in this next session. All right, the next set of questions are from February the 4th. That's yet to be preached yet, so I'm flying a little blind on this, but I have talked to Alan Coker, who's going to preach, a real good friend of ours, a personal friend of mine. Looking forward to hearing him bring a message. And he's got 3 questions on the sermon. The first one is, what are some possible redemptive reasons that Jesus initiated conflict with different sects of religious leaders? All right, so what does he mean by what are some possible redemptive reasons? In other words, why would he do this that would present either a turn or a good outcome? Well, the conflict was redemptive in the sense that it was forming a healthy community of God. It was redemptive in that the poor, when the society was disrupted, when the religious center was disrupted, the poor would be better cared for. The scriptures teach us that pure religion that is acceptable is a religion that takes care of the poor, the foster kids, the forgottens, so it's redemptive when a society gets disrupted. It's actually in that point that the poor get cared for. It's also redemptive in the sense that he is turning upside down all these religious systems that were not going to lead them to the kingdom of God. They were not going to lead them to a powerful reign in eternity. This disruption, this confrontation, if you will, was going to set up a new society that was ushering in the true kingdom of Jesus. Verse 2, what astonishes you about Jesus as he handles the questioning of his opponents? So as I've talked to Alan about this, what he's wanting in this sermon is for us to begin to worship Jesus and to be amazed at how he handles this clear opposition. I think if you read it, you're going to see he was amazingly patient with them. And he was incredibly powerful, and he was incredibly authoritative. And to me, that's astonishing. He was alone, in one sense, amongst this crowd. And he's God, but he's also man. And yet he has the courage and the wisdom and the knowledge and just the good sense of how to handle all of this conflict. He was the God-man. This passage should elicit praise from us because he does what we find so difficult and what we find so unsettling, is that in the midst of all this conflict, he handled it masterfully. And so the third question is, what frightens you about being questioned about your Christian walk and faith, and what might Jesus say to you about those fears? Again, this sermon is really about lifting Jesus high. The theological term for that is that this has a high Christology. It takes Jesus, the person, and elevates him to a high stature. And we're to be like him. And so the question is, when we are in those moments of confrontation, what are we frightened about? Are we worried we're not going to have the right things to say? Are we worried we don't have the confidence? Are we worried we might get physically hurt? Are we worried we might get embarrassed? But our call is to be like him. And so the whole point of this is to worship him and trust him to equip us. Because the scriptures go on to say that he gives us all that we need for life and godliness. And that includes these moments of conflict. So Jesus has a lot to say about those fears. He would say to the angry sea, he said, "Peace, be still." He has the power to overcome forces of nature. He certainly has the power to overcome our fears. And if we'll rely on him and his Spirit, I believe he'll give us the words that we need. And maybe more than words, he gives us the response we need, which may at times not be words, it may be love. All right. So that is session 8. Thank you for all you're doing. Again, I want to make sure you know that my phone is always with me. In fact, it's gone off about 10 times since I've been making this video. Call me if you have any questions. Call Lamar. We are here to serve you. Ephesians 4 teaches us that we are to equip the body for works of service. And that's exactly what you're doing, and we want to equip you to do that. We can't always do that if we don't know what you need, so let us know. Thank you very much.